That was Stop the Money Pipeline by the People's Echo. Welcome back to my podcast, Going Green, with Megan Tin. In last week's episode, we examined the LNG pipeline. This week will be about another project that concerns environmental, racial, and economic justice issues. While watching a YouTube video on Soulfire Farms, which is a Black-run community garden that focuses its effort on providing food for its neighborhoods, I got really interested in learning more about poor communities of color coming together to feed themselves. Because though every beauty pageant contestant seems really concerned with solving world hunger, it's still an ongoing issue in most of the United States. Prism Report's Ruthie Gopalakrishnan writes an article on one New Orleans community which founded a community garden to feed themselves. Crystal Sims Cameron is a leader in establishing and running her neighborhood's community garden. Unlike community gardens I've run into personally, this community garden is not divided into household plots and grown individually. Regardless of contribution, you still get to reap the benefits of the crops. And while stalking Sims Cameron's TikTok page, which is at Ayanla_plantzant, I can verify that she is really ready to feed her neighborhood. She has broccoli, squash, kumquats, and a ton more. And while she is a huge provider for her garden, she's also the founder and runs an organization called For the Horticulture, which is a nonprofit addressing food insecurity, especially in low-income neighborhoods and Black communities. The goal of this is to provide the residents of these neighborhoods with meaningful access to food, and more so, access to sustainable food grown by the community, which seems to be an unfortunately necessary approach to circumvent food deserts, sometimes called food apartheids, because they're man-made, and apartheids represents that this is a neglect by the system. The food production and distribution system does not favor Black and poor communities. In fact, many grocery stores avoid selling high-quality, nutritious, organic food in low-income neighborhoods, knowing that its inaffordability to residents will make it an economic liability for the company. And even more grocery stores avoid selling in those neighborhoods at all. This means that it takes a car, which is expensive to maintain and buy, or adequate public transportation, which we already know is never going to be reliable in low-income areas, to physically access a basic grocery store. So when you're as poor as the people trying to eat in these neighborhoods, it just isn't an option to travel to another part of the city for groceries. This means that corner stores, bodegas, and gas stations are often the only option for food. The grocery system contributes to the disproportionately high rates of diabetes and heart disease and obesity in poor and Black communities, but it isn't just grocery stores. Government programs which address food neglect in low-income households still use protocols and requirements that favor corporations over grassroots organizations. For example, the New Orleans Authority Growing Green program allows the public to rent land for urban farms at $350 a year for 3 years, and at the end of those 3 years offers the land for purchase. Yet, the community leaders say that this program is inaccessible because of process and paperwork, and individuals and small organizations have a hard time applying for the land. Some questions asked are, can you provide proof that you've ever farmed? Can you provide bank statements? Can you provide references? Can you provide letters of community support? We need a letter saying that you have a fiscal sponsor supporting you. We need a fundraising strategy. All of this to rent an empty, undeveloped lot in their own neighborhood, which they just want to use to, yes, feed themselves. Food neglect, especially of Black people, can be traced back to the Civil War, when Black people were first allowed to become landowners. Because of high interest rates on land, Black farmers were trapped into an endless cycle of debt, which was passed down generation to generation before most black land was bought out by white people. In the modern day, with some help from COVID-19, 35% of low-income and non-white neighborhoods are food insecure. With the world turning its back on the health and well-being of communities of color, the victims of decades and centuries of systemic food neglect are becoming the champions of urban farming. Reedy Brooks is an urban gardener and executive director of Glory Gardens, which trains young adults in greenhouse and garden management. She says, "We don't just need food justice, we need food sovereignty." This fight for health is not going unrecognized. Clearly, these communities are making their way into the solution for food insecurity. One neighborhood couple even decided to lease their land to Crystal Sims Cameron after seeing her work. A community garden in the Beacon Hill neighborhood of Seattle has a similar agenda. It is a community-operated garden with no requirement for individuals to contribute in order to reap the harvest. I think this is a brilliant feature because many low-income households do not have the time to spare not only to garden, but to know how to garden. Though I'd still like to thank organizations like Glory Gardens and For the Horticulture for addressing the lack of knowledge in gardening, especially for Black and poor people. I think it is important for these communities to not only rely on the government and corporations to look after them, especially in a way so fundamental to life as food, because there is a clear history of these systems neglecting poor and white people. That being said, I don't think community gardens are the only answer. A great aspect of community gardens being owned and operated by the community is that it can meet the needs of the community more wholesomely because of its grassroots nature and can often be scaled to the dependents. But unfortunately, this isn't completely true, because as the garden grows, effort needs to grow with it, and that means more involved maintenance from the community, which might not be realistic. More so, it does not mean food can be produced all year round in all of these climates. It is important to remember that the community gardens are a result of decades of systemic neglect, and a part of the solution needs to be systemic recognition. Poor communities only having inner reliance while rich neighborhoods can freely shop whatever food they want is not the right answer. These communities deserve more than for us to sweep them to the side and say, solve your own problems. Because that's not food justice, that's still food neglect. So that's my thought of the day. If you want to learn more about this, I'd check out Soulfire Farm's YouTube page. Thank you for listening to my podcast that's Going Green with Megan Tinney, or in this case, Growing Green.